There is something inside you that you're not looking at. Something you've been avoiding for so long that you've almost convinced yourself it doesn't exist. A feeling, a truth, a reality about yourself or your situation that's too uncomfortable to face. So you don't face it. You distract yourself. You numb yourself. You stay busy. You scroll. You consume. You plan. You think about facing it someday when you're stronger, when you're ready, when the timing is better. But that day never comes, because you're not waiting for the right moment. You're waiting for the pain to disappear, and it won't. It can't. Because the pain you're avoiding isn't going anywhere. It's waiting for you on the other side of your fear, on the other side of your resistance. And until you walk through it, until you face what you've been running from, you will remain exactly where you are. This avoidance is costing you more than you realize. It's not just postponing your growth. It's actively preventing it, because the very thing you're avoiding, the discomfort you're resisting, the pain you're running from, that's where your power lives. That's where your strength is forged. That's where transformation happens. Not in comfort, not in distraction, not in the careful management of your life to avoid ever feeling anything difficult, but in the direct confrontation with what hurts, with what scares you, with what you'd rather not acknowledge. Most people spend their entire lives in a carefully constructed cocoon of avoidance. They organize their existence around not feeling certain things, not facing certain truths, not dealing with certain realities. And they call this wisdom. They call it self-care. They call it being kind to themselves. But it's not. It's cowardice dressed up as compassion. And it keeps them weak. It keeps them stuck. It keeps them small. Because here's what they don't understand. Here's what you're about to learn. Pain is not the enemy. Discomfort is not something to be avoided at all costs. The difficult emotions, the hard truths, the uncomfortable realities, these are not obstacles to your growth. They are the very mechanism of growth. They are signals, guides, teachers. And when you spend your life running from them, you're not protecting yourself. You're imprisoning yourself. You're trading temporary comfort for permanent limitation. Today, I'm going to show you something that most people never understand. That the pain you're avoiding is not random. It's not meaningless suffering. It's specific. It's pointing you toward something. Toward a truth you need to accept. Toward a change you need to make. Toward a part of yourself you need to integrate. And on the other side of that pain, on the other side of the discomfort of facing it, is everything you've been looking for. Strength, clarity, freedom, power. Not the kind of power that dominates others. The kind of power that comes from no longer being controlled by your own avoidance, from no longer being imprisoned by what you're afraid to feel. This is not going to be comfortable. If you're expecting motivation and encouragement, you'll find some of that here. But you'll also find confrontation, because growth requires honesty, and honesty requires facing what you've been avoiding. So let me ask you directly. What are you running from? What truth about yourself or your life are you pretending doesn't exist? What emotion have you been suppressing? What reality are you refusing to accept? What discomfort are you organizing your entire existence around avoiding? You know the answer, even if you've never articulated it, even if you've never admitted it to anyone, including yourself. You know what you're avoiding. You can feel it right now. That slight tightening. That subtle resistance, that voice that says, I don't want to think about this. That's it. That's what we're talking about. That's the pain that's waiting for you. And that pain is the doorway to everything you actually want. Most people misunderstand the nature of avoidance. They think they're avoiding specific situations or difficult conversations or challenging tasks. And on the surface, that's true. But beneath all external avoidance is internal avoidance. You're not really avoiding the situation. You're avoiding how the situation makes you feel. You're not avoiding the conversation. You're avoiding the emotions the conversation might trigger. You're not avoiding the task. You're avoiding the fear or inadequacy or vulnerability that attempting the task brings up. This is crucial to understand. All avoidance is emotional avoidance. All resistance is resistance to feeling something. And this makes sense. Emotions can be intense, overwhelming, painful. From childhood, most people learn that certain emotions are dangerous. That feeling too much leads to being hurt. That vulnerability leads to rejection. That anger leads to punishment. That sadness leads to being burdensome. So they learn to suppress, to distract, to disconnect. And these strategies work temporarily. They provide relief from uncomfortable emotions. But they also create a deeper problem, because when you suppress all emotion, you suppress all emotions. When you numb pain, you also numb joy. When you avoid difficult feelings, you also lose access to deep feelings. Your emotional range narrows. Your capacity to feel fully diminishes. You become emotionally flat, going through life in a muted state where nothing hurts too much, but nothing feels very good either. You're safe, protected. But you're also not really alive, not fully, not in the way that makes life worth living. And there's a deeper cost. The emotions you suppress don't disappear. They don't evaporate just because you refuse to feel them. They go underground. They become the background noise of your existence. The anxiety you can't explain. The restlessness you can't satisfy. The sense that something is wrong, but you can't identify what. The emotions you're avoiding are still there, still affecting you. But now they're affecting you unconsciously, controlling you without your awareness, shaping your decisions, your relationships, your entire life from the shadows. This is why avoidance creates weakness rather than strength. When you're constantly managing what you allow yourself to feel, when you're always monitoring your emotional state to make sure nothing difficult surfaces, you're using enormous amounts of energy. Energy that could be directed toward creating, building, growing. Instead, it's being consumed by suppression, by maintenance of the illusion that you're fine, by the exhausting work of keeping yourself from feeling what you actually feel. And this suppression shows up everywhere. In the relationships you can't deepen because you won't allow yourself to be vulnerable. In the opportunities you don't pursue because you won't face the fear of failure. In the changes you don't make because you won't deal with the discomfort of the unfamiliar. In the truth you won't speak because you won't handle the possibility of conflict. Your entire life becomes organized around avoiding emotional discomfort. And in doing so, you avoid growth, you avoid depth, you avoid power. But our culture reinforces this constantly. We're told to be positive, to avoid negativity, to protect our peace, to cut off anything that doesn't serve us. And these messages sound wise. They sound like self-care. But they're often just sophisticated forms of avoidance, sophisticated ways to justify not dealing with what's difficult, not facing what's uncomfortable, not growing through what's painful. Real peace doesn't come from avoiding everything that disturbs you. It comes from developing the capacity to remain centered while experiencing disturbance. Real strength doesn't come from never feeling fear. It comes from feeling fear and acting anyway. Real growth doesn't come from staying comfortable. It comes from deliberately entering discomfort and allowing it to transform you. This is what people who genuinely transform their lives understand. They don't avoid pain. They don't run from discomfort. They walk toward it, deliberately, consciously, not because they enjoy suffering, but because they recognize that on the other side of the pain they're avoiding is the person they need to become, the strength they need to develop, the truth they need to accept, the freedom they're actually seeking. Let me show you what this looks like. Let me tell you about someone who stopped avoiding and discovered what was waiting on the other side. There was a woman I once knew. I'll call her Sarah. For years, Sarah carried a deep sadness she wouldn't acknowledge. It lived beneath everything she did, coloring her days, affecting her relationships, limiting her capacity for joy. But Sarah never looked at it directly, never allowed herself to feel it fully, because she was afraid that if she opened that door, she'd be overwhelmed, that the sadness would consume her, that she'd fall apart and never recover. So Sarah stayed busy, impressively busy. She maintained an active social life. She exercised, she planned trips. She always had something happening, something to focus on, something to keep her mind occupied. And when quiet moments came, when the sadness threatened to surface, she reached for her phone, for television, for anything that would pull her attention away from what she was feeling. This worked for a long time. Sarah convinced herself she was fine. She had a good life, a successful career, friends. Activities. What did she have to be sad about? The sadness must be nothing, just background noise, something to ignore. And she was very good at ignoring it, so good that she almost forgot it was there. But the sadness didn't forget her. It manifested in other ways, in relationships that never deepened because Sarah couldn't allow real intimacy, in a persistent sense of emptiness despite her full schedule, in moments where she'd feel suddenly, inexplicably tearful and not know why, in a vague but constant sense that something was missing, that she was going through the motions of life but not really living it. Then something happened, not dramatic. Sarah's father became ill, and in caring for him, in facing his mortality, Sarah couldn't maintain her defenses anymore. The sadness she'd been avoiding for years rose up, and she finally stopped running. She let herself feel it, fully, without distraction, without suppression, and it was exactly as overwhelming as she feared. For weeks, Sarah felt like she was drowning. The grief was enormous. Not just grief about her father, but accumulated grief from years of losses and disappointments and painful experiences she'd never processed. It all came up at once, and it was excruciating. Sarah cried more in those weeks than she had in the previous decade. She felt raw, exposed, completely undone. But something else happened, something she didn't expect. As she allowed herself to feel the pain instead of running from it, as she stopped resisting and simply let it move through her, it began to shift. The intensity remained, but the character of it changed. It wasn't destroying her. It was revealing her. Beneath the pain was something else, something solid, a core of herself that could hold the pain without being consumed by it. And as Sarah stayed with the discomfort, as she kept facing what she'd been avoiding for years, she discovered something profound. The sadness wasn't the enemy the avoidance was. The sadness was just an emotion, intense and painful, yes, but just an emotion. And emotions, when you allow them move through you, they rise. They peak, they fall, they pass. It's only when you resist them, when you try to suppress them, that they become stuck, that they become the background radiation of your existence. After several months of this process, Sarah emerged different. Not because the sadness was gone completely, but because she was no longer afraid of it. She'd faced the things she'd been running from her entire adult life, and she'd survived more than survived. She'd grown. The capacity to feel deeply, which she'd suppressed to avoid pain, had returned. But now she could feel joy as intensely as she'd felt grief. She could experience connection as deeply as she'd experienced loss. Sarah's relationships changed, because she was no longer protecting herself from vulnerability. She could be present. She could be honest. She could let people in. Her work changed, because she was no longer using business to avoid feeling. She could focus. She could create. She could engage meaningfully. Her entire experience of life deepened, not because circumstances improved, but because she stopped avoiding what was real. She faced the pain. And on the other side of that pain was the aliveness she'd been seeking all along. Now contrast Sarah with someone else, someone I'll call Michael. Michael also carried pain he was avoiding. In his case, it was shame. Deep, pervasive shame about his past, about choices he'd made, about who he'd been. And like Sarah, Michael organized his entire life around not feeling this shame. A persona, someone successful and confident and together. And he maintained this image carefully, never allowing anyone to see beneath it, never allowing himself to look beneath it. But the shame was always there, driving his behavior in ways he didn't recognize, making him defensive when criticized, making him overwork to prove his worth, making him unable to accept love because he didn't believe he deserved it. The shame controlled him completely, but because he never faced it, because he spent all his energy maintaining the illusion that it didn't exist, he never dealt with it. Michael's life looked successful from outside, but inside he was exhausted anxious, empty, and as years passed, the gap between his image and his reality grew larger. The effort required to maintain the pretense increased, and eventually something broke. Michael had a breakdown, not because of external circumstances, but because the internal pressure of avoiding his shame for decades finally exceeded his capacity to contain it. The breakdown forced what Michael had been avoiding. He had to face the shame, had to look at what he'd been running from, and it was brutal. Everything he'd constructed to avoid this moment crumbled. The image, the persona, the careful management of how he was perceived, all of it collapsed, and for a time, Michael felt like he'd lost everything, but he'd also gained something. The opportunity to finally be honest, to finally stop running, to finally face what he'd been avoiding. And in facing it and sitting with the shame instead of fleeing from it, Michael discovered that it wasn't as destructive as he'd feared. It was painful, but it was also just shame and emotion, based on judgments and beliefs that he could examine, that he could question, that he could ultimately release. The process took time. Michael had to unpack decades of avoidance, had to feel everything he'd been suppressing, had to be honest in ways that terrified him. But as he did this work, as he stopped avoiding and started facing, something fundamental shifted. The shame lost its power, not because it disappeared, but because he was no longer trying to hide from it. He acknowledged it, accepted it, and in that acceptance, it no longer controlled him. Today, Michael is different. Not because his past changed, but because his relationship to his past changed. He's no longer defending against shame. He's no longer maintaining an image to hide behind. He's just himself, human, real. And that realness, that willingness to be seen without pretense, has created a depth and authenticity in his life that the image never provided. He has genuine connections now, because people are relating to him, not to his persona. He has peace now. Not the false peace of successful avoidance, but the real peace that comes from no longer running from yourself. These two stories illustrate something essential. The pain we avoid doesn't diminish over time. It accumulates, it compounds, it controls us more and more deeply the longer we refuse to face it. But when we stop avoiding, when we turn toward the pain instead of away from it, when we allow ourselves to feel what we've been running from, transformation becomes possible. Not pleasant, not comfortable, but possible, and ultimately liberating. So what does this mean practically? How do you stop avoiding and start facing? How do you walk toward pain instead of away from it? Let me break down exactly what changes when you make this shift. First, you develop emotional honesty. This is different from emotional expression. Expression is about showing others what you feel. Honesty is about acknowledging to yourself what you actually feel. Most people lie to themselves constantly about their emotional state. They feel angry but tell themselves they're fine. They feel afraid but convince themselves they're brave. They feel sad but insist they're just tired. This self-deception feels protective, but it's actually destructive. Because when you can't be honest with yourself about what you feel, you can't address what you feel. The emotion continues affecting you, but now you don't even know it's happening. You just experience the consequences, the reactivity, the anxiety, the depression, the numbness, all symptoms of suppressed emotion that you've convinced yourself you're not feeling. Emotional honesty means stopping this self-deception. It means checking in with yourself regularly and acknowledging what's actually true. I'm angry, I'm afraid, I'm sad, I'm hurt. Not judging these feelings, not trying to change them immediately, just acknowledging them. This simple practice, honest acknowledgement of what you feel, begins to dissolve the power of avoidance, because you can't avoid what you're consciously acknowledging. Second, you practice self-confrontation. This is the willingness to look at yourself clearly, to examine your patterns, your defenses, your ways of avoiding discomfort. Most people never do this. They live their entire lives without ever really looking at how they operate, how they sabotage themselves, how they create the very problems they complain about. Because looking at this is uncomfortable. It requires admitting things about yourself that are difficult to admit, but self-confrontation is essential for growth. You cannot change patterns you refuse to see. You cannot address problems you won't acknowledge. Self-confrontation means asking yourself hard questions. Why do I keep ending up in the same situation? What am I avoiding by staying busy? What truth am I not willing to face? What part of myself am I refusing to accept? These questions are uncomfortable, but they're also the doorway to understanding yourself at a level that makes real change possible. This doesn't mean being cruel to yourself. Self-confrontation is not self-attack. It's honest examination. It's the willingness to see yourself clearly, including the parts you'd rather not see without judgment. Just observation, just truth, and from that truth, growth becomes possible. Third, you build discipline through discomfort. Real discipline is not forcing yourself to do what you hate. Real discipline is the capacity to remain present with discomfort without fleeing from it, to feel the urge to avoid and not act on it, to experience resistance and move forward anyway. This capacity is trained, not through motivation or willpower, but through repeatedly choosing to face small discomforts instead of avoiding them. Start with tiny things. Feel the urge to check your phone and don't. Feel the impulse to have a difficult conversation and have it instead of postponing. Feel the fear of attempting something new and attempt it anyway. Each time you stay with discomfort instead of fleeing from it, you're training the capacity to face harder things. You're proving to yourself that discomfort is not dangerous, that you can feel it and survive, that on the other side of it is growth. This training is cumulative. The more you practice staying with discomfort, the stronger your capacity becomes. Eventually, you can face things that would have paralyzed you before, not because you've become immune to discomfort, but because you've learned that discomfort is just a feeling, not a threat, not something to organize your entire life around avoiding. Just a temporary state that signals growth is happening. Fourth, you develop inner resilience. This is different from toughness. Toughness implies rigidity. Resilience implies flexibility, the capacity to bend without breaking, to be affected by difficulty without being destroyed by it. And resilience is built through experience with difficulty, through facing pain and discovering you can handle it, through being knocked down and getting back up, through surviving what you thought would destroy you. Most people never develop real resilience because they spend their lives avoiding the experiences that would build it. They try to create a life without pain, without difficulty, without challenge. And in doing so, they remain fragile. When inevitable difficulties arise, they're unprepared. They have no reference point for handling hardship. No evidence that they can face what's difficult and survive. But when you deliberately face pain instead of avoiding it, when you walk toward discomfort rather than away from it, you build a different kind of foundation. You accumulate evidence of your own strength. You discover that you're more capable than you believed, more resilient than you knew. And this discovery creates confidence that no amount of avoidance can provide, because it's not confidence based on never being challenged. It's confidence based on being challenged repeatedly and discovering you can handle it. Fifth, you gain access to quiet power. This is the most important shift. When you're no longer controlled by what you're avoiding, when you're no longer organizing your life around, not feeling certain things, enormous energy becomes available. Energy that was being consumed by suppression is now free. And this energy feels like power, not aggressive power, not dominating power, but the quiet power of someone who is not afraid of themselves, not afraid of what they might feel, not controlled by their own resistance. This power manifests as presence, as centeredness, as the capacity to remain calm when others are panicking, to think clearly when others are reactive, to act decisively when others are paralyzed by fear, because you're not using your energy to avoid discomfort. You're using it to create, to solve, to build. And people feel this. They're drawn to it, because everyone is looking for people who aren't controlled by fear, who can face what's difficult without falling apart. This power also manifests as freedom. When you're no longer afraid of pain, you're no longer limited by the need to avoid it. You can pursue what matters to you without constantly calculating whether it might be uncomfortable. You can have difficult conversations, make hard choices, take risks, speak truth, change direction, all without the crippling constraint of trying to ensure you never feel anything painful. You're free not because life stops being difficult, but because difficulty stops controlling you. Now here's the realization that changes everything. Pain is not punishment. Pain is information. It's a signal, a teacher, a guide. When you feel emotional pain, your psyche is telling you something. Maybe there's a truth you need to accept. Maybe there's a change you need to make. Maybe there's a part of yourself you need to integrate. Maybe there's a loss you need to grieve. The pain is pointing you toward what needs attention, what needs to be faced, what needs to be healed. But when you avoid the pain, you miss the message. You reject the guidance. You refuse the growth that the pain is trying to catalyze. And so you remain stuck. The same patterns repeat. The same problems resurface. The same limitations persist. Not because you're broken, but because you're refusing to receive the information your own pain is trying to give you. This is why pain is not the enemy. Avoidance is the enemy. Pain, when faced, is the doorway to growth, to strength, to wisdom, to power. Every person who has genuinely transformed their life has walked through pain to get there. Not because they sought suffering, but because they stopped running from it. They turned toward what hurt. They felt what they'd been avoiding. And on the other side of that pain, they found the version of themselves they'd been looking for all along. Think about what this means for you, right now. In whatever you're facing, there is pain you're avoiding. You know what it is. You can feel it beneath the surface of your awareness. That thing you don't want to look at. That truth you don't want to accept. That emotion you don't want to feel. That reality you don't want to face. It's there, waiting, and it will continue waiting until you're ready to turn toward it. But here's what you need to understand. The longer you wait, the more power the pain accumulates, the more energy you spend avoiding it, the more limited your life becomes. The avoidance itself becomes the problem, becomes the source of suffering that dwarfs the original pain. Because the pain you're avoiding is finite. It has a beginning, a middle, and an end. But the avoidance is infinite. It continues as long as you continue it, and it costs you more every day you maintain it. So what would happen if you stopped? What would happen if you turned toward the pain instead of away from it? What would happen if you allowed yourself to feel what you've been running from? Not recklessly, not without support if you need it, but consciously, deliberately, with the willingness to face whatever is there. I can tell you what would happen. Initially, it would be hard, possibly very hard. The pain you've been avoiding is painful. That's why you've been avoiding it. It will hurt. You might cry. You might feel overwhelmed. You might doubt whether you can handle it. And that's okay. That's part of the process. The pain isn't going to destroy you. It's going to move through you. And as it does, as you allow it instead of resisting it, something will shift. The pain will peak, and then it will begin to subside. Not immediately, but eventually, because that's the nature of emotion. It rises, it peaks, it falls, it passes. When you resist it, when you fight it, when you try to suppress it, you interrupt this natural cycle. You keep the emotion activated. But when you allow it, when you simply feel it without resistance, it completes its cycle. And when it passes, what remains is clarity, space, relief, and something deeper. The knowledge that you faced what you were afraid to face, and you survived. You're stronger than you thought, more capable, more resilient, and this knowledge changes everything, because now you know. You know you can face pain. You know discomfort isn't dangerous. You know that what you were running from couldn't destroy you. And with that knowledge comes freedom, the freedom to stop avoiding, to stop organizing your entire life around not feeling certain things, to stop being controlled by your own fear of pain. This freedom is what's waiting for you on the other side of the pain you're avoiding. Not the absence of pain, but the power to face it, the strength to feel it, the wisdom to learn from it, the growth that emerges through it. All of this is available, but only if you're willing to stop running, to turn around, to face what's behind you, to walk through the doorway that the pain is marking. Let me be clear. This is not easy. Nothing about this is easy. Facing what you've been avoiding, feeling what you've been suppressing, acknowledging what you've been denying, it's difficult work. It requires courage. It requires honesty. It requires the willingness to be uncomfortable, to be vulnerable, to not know how it will turn out, to trust that the process of facing pain is worthwhile, even when every instinct tells you to run. But this difficult work is also the most important work you can do, because your entire life is shaped by what you're willing to face, the depth you can experience, the connections you can form, the growth you can achieve, the power you can access. All of it depends on your willingness to stop avoiding and start facing, to stop running and start standing, to stop suppressing and start feeling. And here's what I want you to understand. You are capable of this. You are stronger than you believe, more resilient than you know, more powerful than you've allowed yourself to be. The pain you're avoiding is not too much for you. It never was. You've been strong enough to handle it all along. You just didn't know it, because you never tested it. You never gave yourself the chance to discover what you're capable of bearing, what you're capable of feeling, what you're capable of surviving. But you can discover it now. You can stop waiting for the pain to disappear. You can stop hoping you'll become strong enough to face it someday. You can turn toward it now, feel it now, walk through it now, and discover what's waiting on the other side. The person you've been trying to become, the strength you've been trying to build, the power you've been trying to access. It's all there, behind the pain, through the pain, on the other side of the discomfort you've been avoiding. This is not about seeking suffering. It's not about making life harder than it needs to be. It's about recognizing that the pain is already there. You're already carrying it. The question is whether you'll keep carrying it as a burden you refuse to acknowledge, or whether you'll finally set it down by feeling it fully and letting it pass through you. One choice keeps you imprisoned. The other sets you free. So I'll ask you again, what are you avoiding? What pain are you running from? What discomfort are you organizing your entire existence around not feeling? You know the answer. And now you know what to do with it. Turn toward it. Face it, feel it. Not someday. Not when you're ready now. While you still have the clarity to choose it. While you still have the courage this conversation has sparked. Before the familiar patterns of avoidance reassert themselves and convince you to wait just a little longer. Because here's the truth. The pain you're avoiding is the doorway to your power. Not metaphorically, literally. Your strength is on the other side of it. Your freedom is through it. Your growth is in it. Everything you've been seeking is waiting where you've been refusing to look. In the discomfort, in the difficulty, in the pain you've been running from your entire life. Walk toward it, not because it will be easy, but because it's the only way forward. Because avoidance keeps you small and facing makes you strong. Because the person you're capable of becoming is waiting on the other side of the pain. And that person is worth the discomfort of getting there. You are worth it. The life you could have is worth it. The freedom waiting for you is worth it. Turn toward the pain. Face what you've been avoiding. Feel what you've been suppressing. And discover what you've always been capable of. The power was never in the avoidance. It was always in the facing. Always in the courage to feel what's real. Always in the willingness to walk through discomfort toward growth. That power is yours. It's been yours all along. You just have to claim it. And claiming it begins with one choice: to stop running, to turn around, to face what's been chasing you, to walk through the doorway marked by pain, and to discover what's been waiting for you on the other side all along. Yourself, strong, free,